At 82, my knees ached with every leap between the rusting gutters and loose tiles, but I moved with purpose. I wasn't running because I was scared. I was running because I knew too much. And they knew that I knew. The men in black chased without hesitation. Professional, coordinated, government maybe, or worse, off-the-books government. I could hear the static of their radios catching in the rain behind me, their boots pounding like war drums. A bullet split the air an inch from my shoulder. They think they can silence me forever? Not cruelly, just flat, like it was a fact. That was the first time I understood that you could be invisible even while being watched. So I learned to shrink, to listen, to become useful and unmemorable. I stacked days like bricks, hoping they would build a wall high enough to earn her smile. It never came, but I was watching, always watching. And I saw how people made power from what others missed. That instinct, honed in childhood, was what kept me alive when I joined the unit. We weren't soldiers. We were shadows. Played the fool. But inside, alarms were going off I hadn't heard in years. Later, they came for me. No warning. No charges. Just hands grabbing, eyes cold. Voices barking like orders in some forgotten war. But I had plans they hadn't accounted for. Protocols. Friends who owed me favors even after decades of silence. And now here I was, on the roof. In the storm, 82 years old, chased by shadows of my own making. I didn't run because I was afraid of death. I ran because someone, somewhere, still believed a lie they were paid to protect. And we were done with lies. Every family dinner was a silent choreography of exclusion. Plates clinked, glasses passed, and yet somehow, there was always one chair missing. Mine. If I didn't drag it over myself, no one noticed. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. I'd sit there, hands folded, pretending not to hear the casual jabs. And when I brought home straight A's, the only response from my mother was, "Don't get smug. No one likes a show-off." I learned to keep my brilliance secret. I buried it like a bone in the yard. I was the experiment they resented for surviving. The moment I knew for certain was my 16th birthday. My older brother, Daniel, handed over an envelope like it weighed nothing. Inside, a stack of printed messages, emails from a burner account, laced with my name, accusations of betrayal, and screenshots that only someone inside our home could have accessed. It was a trap. He blamed me for leaking Dad's classified files Daniel himself had tried to sell. He said I snooped, hacked, sold us all out. And the family believed him. Because why not? I was the strange one, the quiet one, the invisible chair girl. I remember standing there, cold sheet cake untouched, the candles still smoking in the trash. No one looked at me. What do you do? When the people who taught you what love should be become your first betrayers. You walk away. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I just left. Outside, the world smelled of grass and city fumes. I had $42 in my backpack and a train ticket I hadn't planned to use. But I used it that night. I boarded the 11:13 to Cincinnati, sat by the window, and watched my past blur into darkness. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt unbound. That was the night I stopped being Eleanor the disappointment and started being Ellie, the observer. The ghost in the corner. The girl who never needed a chair again because she'd build her own table one day. I didn't know then that I'd return to that same silence, decades later. I found a corner where the moonlight barely reached and let myself tremble for the first time in years. My fingers ached from climbing. My lungs stung from the cold. But what shook me most wasn't the body's pain. It was the memory. I thought I had buried her, the woman I used to be. But Viper 7 hadn't gone away. She had simply gone quiet, waiting. And now she was awake again. In the silence of that greenhouse, I felt her stir. And I wasn't sure if I was relieved or terrified. Because with her came everything else, faces, voices, blood. The nights with no name, missions with no return address. The sound of Leo's voice in my ear. If this goes wrong, we vanish. The look in Scout's eyes the night she had to leave me behind. Even though it nearly broke her. Ethan's trembling hands stitching me up in silence. And then there were the ones we lost. Names I never said out loud. Because if you name them, you keep them. And we weren't allowed to keep anything. I closed my eyes, but the dark behind my eyelids only made the memories louder. Screams echoing from corridors in Beirut. The weight of a child's photo found in a warlord's pocket. The smell of metal and fear. I pulled my coat tighter, as if that could shut it out. You think fear hits you when the guns are drawn. It doesn't. It waits until you're alone. until your breath is the only sound, until you remember that you survived something others didn't, and you still don't know why. By morning, I knew they'd traced me. I heard it in the hum of the power lines above, in the pause between bird songs, in the way the air tensed before a storm you couldn't see yet. I had to move. But where? My name was no longer mine. My face had been erased from most systems, yes, but not all. They would find me, and when they did, they wouldn't ask questions. So I did something reckless. I walked into the local police station. I could feel their eyes before the door even shut behind me. The officers paused mid-conversation. A file folder dropped. I kept walking. Corbin wasn't there, but his deputy, a boy no older than my granddaughter, stood frozen as I approached the front desk. "I'd like to speak to someone about an illegal detainment," I said, voice steady. "Mine." He blinked. "Ma'am, do you, have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but you're going to want to call your boss. And then Washington. Use the red line." His face went pale. "The red?" "Tell them Viper 7 invoked Falcon Protocol." That was when the room changed. Radios crackled. Eyes narrowed. Two agents, plainclothes but unmistakable, stepped in from the hallway. Exchanging looks they thought I couldn't read. They were already here. Of course they were. I stood tall. My back hurt. My knees throbbed. But I didn't bend. I wasn't begging. I was reminding them. I wasn't dead yet. And when you've spent your life in the shadows, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is step into the light and say, "I remember. I'm still here. I am not done." I've always believed the truth has weight. You can feel it, even before it takes form, like pressure in your chest or the tingle at the base of your spine when someone's watching. That morning, as I stood under flickering fluorescent lights in the Havenwood precinct, I felt it pressing down on me. They tried to shuffle me into an interview room like I was some confused grandmother who wandered off. But I wasn't confused. I was calculating. Every inch of that station had weak spots, old wiring, outdated cameras, lazy posture from men who'd never seen real war. And above all, they underestimated me. That would be their first mistake, when they left me alone for processing. I used the few minutes wisely, pulled a pocket knife from my boot, the kind they forgot to check, and unscrewed the panel beneath the table. Wires. Ports. The old kind, analog and vulnerable. I connected a micro drive from my locket. Yes, my locket, and triggered a silent ping. Falcon Protocol initiated. 2,000 miles away. A blinking light came alive in a forgotten subbasement of the Pentagon. I imagined the sirens, the coded calls, the agents jolting awake. For the first time in decades, the name Viper 7 lit up a red board. Good. But I still needed answers. Corbin had made this personal. His vendetta wasn't just about protocol or suspicion, it had roots. I could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the flicker of hatred in his eyes when he finally walked into the room. He closed the door behind him, sat across from me, silent for a beat too long. "You've caused a mess, Eleanor," he said. I smiled. "Not yet. But give me a minute." His lips tightened. "You think this is some game?" "I think you're afraid of something," I said. "Something you hoped would stay buried along with me." That's when I saw it. Hesitation. A micro-flinch. Not fear of me, but fear of exposure. That confirmed it. He knew. I leaned forward. "Tell me, does your father still have nightmares about Operation Alabaster?" He went still. There it was. Corbin Sr., a man who'd been quietly, dishonorably discharged under a sealed operation I happened to lead. The kind of mission where orders were given in whispers and outcomes were erased by morning. He was reckless. He got good people killed. I reported him. Corbin Jr. had been nursing that grudge his whole life. I stood up, slow and deliberate. "You're not after justice. You're after revenge. And I don't care. But when your vendetta threatens national security, it becomes my business again." At that moment, the door burst open. Two men in black suits stepped in. Not local, not even federal. These were deep command. One of them held out a badge. "Eleanor Vance is to be released immediately under Executive Security Order 77 Delta." "You're relieved, Sheriff." Corbin started to protest, but the agent cut him off with a single word: consequences. I walked out of that station without handcuffs, but not without weight. Something had been set in motion. Something bigger than personal revenge. Bigger than Havenwood. Later that night, I returned to my garden. The roses were blooming wide, red as spilled secrets. I dug into the soil beside the stone wall, 6 inches down, in a rusted tin box. Inside, maps, photographs. A journal I swore I'd never open again. I turned to the page marked with a pressed violet. The last mission. The one that never made it into the reports. The one with Thorn. That name hadn't passed my lips in years, but now it pulsed like a siren in my skull. Marcus Thorn. He was supposed to be dead. I lit a single candle, placed it by the window, and whispered into the night, "Time to finish what you started." I wasn't just looking for answers anymore. I was hunting them. The first move was always the riskiest. I had survived 1,000 first moves in my life, but this one carried a different weight. It wasn't a bullet I was dodging, it was time. Time erodes everything: reflexes, trust, memory. But not resolve. I left Havenwood before sunrise, driving a borrowed truck that coughed like a dying dog every few miles. I didn't head toward Washington or Langley or any of the obvious choices. I drove west, toward the desert, toward Ghost, Leo Ramirez. Call sign, Ghost. My comms expert. The only person who ever managed to vanish from our world entirely. He once rerouted an entire NSA surveillance net to give me 12 minutes of invisibility. 12 minutes that saved a continent. I found him outside Barstow, living in a camper behind a rundown gas station, selling spare radio parts and hand-tuned transistor sets to desert weirdos. He didn't recognize me at first. Then he saw the scar on my left hand. "Shit," he whispered, blinking like he'd seen a ghost of his own. "Viper." "Still breathing," I said, "and still cleaning up Thorn's mess." That was all it took. Within an hour, he pulled out a satellite uplink dish from beneath a tarp, wiped off the sand, and powered up a device I hadn't seen since 1997. "Still works," he grinned. "Mostly." We pinged an old contact, Sarah Miller, alias Scout, our quartermaster. She lived in northern Arizona now, running a hiking school for troubled girls. She picked up the signal on an encrypted frequency and answered without hesitation. "I've been waiting for this call." By nightfall, the three of us were sitting around a folding table under the open sky, pulling out maps, decrypting files, and piecing together what little remained of Operation Phoenix. It felt almost like the old days, until the drone buzzed overhead. I spotted it first. Low, fast, silent. Civilian looking, but I wasn't fooled. "They found you already?" Ghost asked. "No," I said. "They found you." He cursed and reached for his jammer. Scout already had a rifle out, tracking its movement, but the drone was gone in seconds, vanishing into the horizon like a shadow slipping under a door. "Time's shorter than I thought," I murmured. "They're watching survivors now." Ghost nodded grimly. "Then we stop surviving and start hitting back." Our first strike was small, a data cache buried in an old Cold War relay bunker near the Nevada border. We hiked in under moonlight, dodging motion sensors and desert rattlers. The cache was still there, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed in a metal box, protected by layers of outdated encryption. Ghost broke in under a minute. Inside, photos, names, mission logs from Phoenix, and one classified memo signed by General Marcus Thorn himself, dated 2 days before the operation went dark. He'd ordered the extraction to be called off. Left us behind. That was the proof we needed. But someone else wanted it too. The moment we reached the truck, a warning shot split the night. Figures emerged from behind rock formations 3. "You're not dead," she said. "Disappointed?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Not yet. I decrypted your coordinates. You have data on Phoenix?" "More than that. I have motive." I told her about Thorn, about the betrayal, the drone, the attack. She didn't flinch. "He's still operating. Shadowfall. Black budget intel arm with no oversight. I've been tracing fragments for months, but I couldn't prove anything until now." I held up the memo. Her eyes widened. "It's time to go public," she said. "Not yet," I answered. "First, we finish the mission." And with that, Viper 7 was no longer just a relic of war. I was a reckoning. The room was brighter than I expected. Stark. Sterile light poured down from ceiling panels above a polished floor that reflected every movement. Cameras lined the corners like insects waiting to sting. In the center stood a podium, and behind it, District Director Arthur Sterling. I walked in through the side door, not escorted, not restrained. Just me. My cane tapped a steady rhythm as I moved forward. For the first time in decades, I wanted to be seen. The press conference had been hastily called after Chloe leaked a redacted version of the Phoenix memo to independent media outlets. It spread like wildfire, picked up by a handful of veterans advocacy groups and a curious, relentless journalist named Julian Hayes. He requested an interview. I gave him 30 seconds of silence and a look that said more than words could. He published the story anyway. Viper 7 is alive. It was enough. Public pressure reached boiling point. Congress demanded a response. Sterling, smug and cornered, scheduled the press conference to clarify recent conspiracy claims. He didn't know I would be attending. I stepped onto the stage just as he began speaking. He froze. Cameras clicked. Reporters gasped. "Director," I said calmly, "you left something out." He blinked. "MS. Vance. I don't think this is." I held up the memo. "This document," I continued, "proves that General Marcus Thorne ordered the withdrawal of Allied forces during Operation Phoenix, leaving our unit for dead. It was signed, stamped, and buried. Until now." Gasps. Murmurs. Sterling's face paled. "I was there," I said. "And that this government has funded, hidden, and enabled operations outside any ethical or legal oversight for far too long." Sterling tried to leave. I stepped in front of him. "You remember Beirut, don't you?" I whispered. "You signed off on that supply drop. You never checked the coordinates. You let civilians die." His jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. And so does everyone here now." He shoved past me, but it was too late. The images, the files, the names, they were in the room, dancing across projection screens like ghosts refusing to be silenced. The shift happened slowly. A woman in the crowd began to clap. Then another. Then the room swelled with sound. Reporters. Veterans, staffers. Not for me. Not for vengeance. But for truth. Sterling was escorted out by security not long after. Julian met me outside. He didn't say anything, just handed me a flash drive. From a source inside Sterling's office. "You'll want to see it." Inside, a voice recording. Thorne. Calm, arrogant, unmistakable. Discussing contingency plans. "If Viper 7 resurfaces," he said, "we ensure she doesn't walk out a second time." The threat wasn't hypothetical. He wanted me dead. Later that night, I sat in my garden, watching bees roll sleepily between the roses. The air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. I wasn't angry. I was ready. Let him come. You'd think that after delivering the truth, after lifting the curtain and letting the world see what was once only mine, I would feel peace, vindication, something clean and resolute. But that night, sitting in my silent kitchen with a cup of chamomile trembling in my hand, I felt hollow. I watched the steam rise, curl, and vanish like so many things had before it. I had spoken. I had won the room. And yet, the quiet that followed was heavier than any silence before. What if I was wrong? What if speaking out would only invite more blood? In my life? Hesitation got people killed. Decisions had to be made fast, sharp, and clear. But now I found myself spiraling through every face, every name I dragged into the light again. Ghost, Scout, Chloe, even Julian. I had exposed them, tethered them to something foul and ancient. What if Thorne reached them before I could stop him? What if the old ghosts came knocking? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened a box I hadn't touched in 30 years. Inside were letters, unsent, unopened, written to no one. Maybe to myself. Maybe to those I'd lost. They were my way of remembering, and my way of grieving. I read one aloud. It was to Eli Becker, our team medic during Phoenix. He'd been 26, wore glasses even during combat, hummed jazz to steady his hands while stitching wounds. He bled out in my arms. "I never forgot your humming," I whispered. And I cried. Not the kind of tears that fall quickly and dry just as fast. These were old, stored somewhere deep, and they came like floodwater through a cracked dam. I let them fall, because for the first time in decades, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Viper 7. Eleanor Vance? Hero? Monster? A woman who survived, or one who left too many behind? In the morning, I walked into town, head down, coat tight. The world had changed overnight. I met mine differently, some with awe, others with fear, and more than a few with skepticism. One man outside the bakery muttered, "She's just trying to stay relevant." Another, younger, called after me, "Thank you." The duality of it all scraped at me. Back in the garden, I found myself staring at a single rose that hadn't bloomed in 2 seasons. A late frost had stunted it. And yet it still reached skyward, its thorns intact. I ran my fingers along the stem, ignoring the sting. I whispered, "I'm not done." That afternoon, I called Ghost and Scout back to the safe house. Chloe joined via secure line. We reviewed the voice recording, Thorne's plans, his arrogance, his timeline. They asked what was next. I stood up. My knees popped. My spine ached. But my voice was steady. "We go further. No more waiting for them to strike," I said. "No more shadows." We pull the curtain down. Completely. Ghost leaned back, brow furrowed. "You're sure?" "I'm done running," I replied. "I'm not asking if I'm right anymore. I know I am. And I'm not doing this for payback. I'm doing it so no one else has to carry this weight again." And for the first time since it all began, I saw the fear in me give way to something else. Conviction. I would not waver. I would not beg. I would not bury one more truth. The fire spread faster than any of us expected. Julian's follow-up exposé dropped at 6:42 a.m., just before commuters poured their coffee. By 9 o'clock, it had over 12 million views. Shadowfall Unmasked, the real story behind Viper 7. The comments came in like tidal waves, some praising, others accusing. Many demanding answers neither the press nor the government could give fast enough. That afternoon, national outlets picked up the story. Cable news hosts speculated about rogue agencies. Veterans posted tributes and fury in equal measure, and suddenly I wasn't just a woman in hiding. I was a symbol, a debate, a storm. It wasn't comfortable. Some said I was a patriot. Others. Chloe said during a secure call, "You're neither." That scares them. It wasn't just media heat. Threats came in. Phone calls to Julian's office, encrypted texts to Ghost. Scout's face appeared on a hit list circulated in a dark network forum. I warned her to lay low. She didn't. Instead, she stocked up on ammunition. By Thursday, Shadowfall responded. They didn't release a statement. They didn't deny or confirm. They retaliated the only way they knew. A lawsuit filed through a shell corporation accusing me of leaking classified information. Conspiracy to incite panic and endangering national stability. "Cute," I muttered, reading the filing. They still think the system will protect them. But the moves weren't just legal. A doctored video surfaced of me in a foreign conflict zone, footage twisted to suggest I had turned on Allied forces. It was grainy, full of errors. But it didn't matter. People believed what fit their fear. I became a villain in someone else's narrative. I received a letter, handwritten and signed. "You should have stayed buried." We began to splinter under the pressure. Chloe wanted to release everything immediately, all documents, audio, names. Ghost disagreed. A full dump puts people in danger. Good people. Or half-glimpsed reports, or missing colleagues. We weren't alone anymore. The safe house in New Mexico buzzed like a beehive. Sleep was short, meals shorter. But the air was alive with purpose. With clarity. I saw Ghost smile for the first time in years. Scout taught a girl named Raina how to field strip a sidearm. Julian showed 2 students how to trace money through shell corporations. I felt something I hadn't sensed before Beirut. Hope. That night, after the data dump went live, a curated release with evidence, names, accounts, my phone rang. A voice I hadn't heard in decades. "Viper," said Dr. Ethan Cole. "I've been waiting for this day. You in?" I asked. "Always." He brought more than medical expertise. He had footage. Secret audio from the Phoenix debriefing. Thorne's voice. Clear. Cold. They're expendable. Let them die clean. It wasn't just corruption. It was murder. We added the clip to the campaign. Uploaded it. Shared it. Watched it burn across the net like righteous fire. And when it aired on national news, I sat in the shadows of that church, hands clasped, and whispered a name. Eli. Then I stood. And I knew. The reckoning had begun. It came at 3:17 a.m., an unmarked Vance screeching outside the safe house, followed by the crack of glass and a flash grenade through the front window. The walls shook. Fire alarms wailed. But we were ready. Ghost hit the kill switch, plunging the house into blackout. Scout rolled beneath the table, rifle drawn. While Chloe slammed her laptop shut and shoved it into a lead-lined case, Julian ducked behind a filing cabinet, heart pounding loud enough I could hear it across the room. Me? I stood perfectly still, breathing slow. 2 figures breached the door in tight formation, flashlights slicing the dark. Before they could shout a command, Scout fired, one shot into the floor. Splintering wood between their feet. They hesitated, just long enough. Maya's crew, armed with homemade smoke bombs and a barrage of sound emitters, disoriented them. Within seconds. And then the gavel dropped. A warrant was issued for Thorne's arrest that evening. Charges: conspiracy, murder, treason. He didn't resist. Because deep down, he knew. Truth doesn't just surface. It rises, and it roars. I thought I'd feel something when the cuffs clicked shut on Thorne's wrists. Relief, maybe. Satisfaction. Closure. But standing outside the courthouse that night, watching the crowds chant and cheer, I felt none of it. Instead, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep. This was deeper, a weariness that settled in my bones like winter. The kind of tired you carry when you've finally laid down a burden that's shaped your spine for decades. That night, I returned to the motel under a false name. The room was cold. Thin sheets. A hum from the vending machine outside. I sat on the edge of the bed and took off my boots slowly. Each step of this mission had brought me closer to truth. Yes, but also further from the life I once knew. Because nothing would be the same again. Julian left the movement 2 days later. His name was on every news channel. Too visible. Too vulnerable. His sister had received threats. He handed Chloe his hard drives and said goodbye without looking back. Scout disappeared next. Not out of fear, out of instinct. Too loud now, she texted. Going dark. Love you. Ghost followed. Left a note under my mug. Some of us only know how to survive in silence. Even Ethan retreated, back into the quiet halls of his university, offering to advise from a distance. Chloe remained, barely. She looked different now. Older somehow. Less reckless, more precise. I didn't think it would cost this much, she said once, voice soft. It always does, I replied. Because truth doesn't come free. The attacks didn't stop, either. Online hate campaigns. Legal threats. Doxing. My mailbox was filled with both thank you letters and death wishes. My front window cracked from a thrown stone I never heard. And worst of all, my roses didn't bloom that season. It was like the earth itself had exhaled and decided enough was enough. So I stopped tending them. I stopped doing a lot of things. I no longer answered calls from journalists. I declined interviews. I ignored the talk shows, the documentaries, the dramatizations. I didn't want to be a symbol anymore. I never did. I rented a small cabin in Vermont under a different name. No internet. No news. Just trees. Pine, birch, and maple, brushing their fingers against the window at night. I chopped wood, boiled water, stared at the fire like it might speak. And in that silence, I realized something unexpected. I missed the noise. Not the chaos or the danger, but the voices. The warmth of being believed. Of mattering. Of not carrying the weight alone. But they were all gone now. Everyone had returned to their corners. Their safe distances. And I was alone. Again. I thought of Scout's laugh. Ghost humming. Chloe's furious typing. Julian's awful coffee. Ethan's trembling hands. I missed them like I missed a part of myself. Still, I didn't regret it. But the cost? It was written into every wrinkle on my hands. Every step that came slower. Every sunrise that felt just a little heavier than the last. I hadn't started over. I just continued. Changed. Quiet. But not broken. Not yet. I remember the first time someone truly saw me. Not the hardened veteran shrouded in secrets, but the woman beneath the scars. I sat on the edge of a weathered wooden bench in a quiet park at dawn. The mist swirling around my legs like memories long forgotten. It was there that I met Amelia, a gentle soul with soft eyes and quiet determination. She approached without preamble. Her presence as natural as the early light that spilled over dew-damp grass. I see you, she said simply, her voice a warm murmur against the chirps of awakening birds. In that moment, I realized that someone could look past the hardened exterior and the legacy of vengeance to notice the inner self yearning for healing. For years, I had carried the weight of secrets and regrets like a shroud, unwilling to accept any kindness for fear it might be mistaken for weakness. I had learned to shield my heart behind layers of resolve and bitterness. But Amelia's sincere gaze made me question whether the burdens I carried were meant to be shouldered alone. There was a softness in her expression, a quiet empathy that acknowledged my pain without judgment. I found myself opening up in a way I had long neglected. I spoke of long nights filled with solitary grief, of the voices in my head that recounted every failure and every loss. I told her how the roses in my garden, once symbols of hope and beauty, had withered under the harshness of recent days, as if reflecting the barren state of my heart. Over subsequent mornings, we met beneath the sprawling oak in that same park. With each encounter, her gentle encouragement helped me rediscover parts of myself I had thought irretrievably lost. She urged me to forgive not only those who had wronged me, but also the person I had become in my relentless pursuit of justice. Healing, she would say softly, is not forgetting the past. It is letting the past no longer imprison you. Her words resonated deeply, reverberating through the quiet corridors of my guarded soul. As our conversations unfolded, I began to see that the journey toward healing was not a solitary endeavor. The scars I bore were not badges of honor alone. They were also reminders that I had once been vulnerable, capable of both profound loss and remarkable love. On one particularly bright morning, Amelia invited me to visit a small community garden on the outskirts of town. A hidden gem where neglected plots were transformed by the care of those who believed in renewal. The garden was alive with bursts of color, marigolds, daisies, and delicate wildflowers danced in the gentle breeze, each bloom a testament to nature's resilience. Here, amid the rich, loamy earth and the soft hum of life, I found a metaphor for my own recovery. Amelia handed me a packet of seeds, a vibrant red rose, a flower I had long forsaken in my own garden, and said, "Plant this, and let it remind you that beauty can arise even from the darkest soil." With trembling hands, I pressed the seeds into the earth, feeling as though I was finally setting aside the burdens of my past. In that moment, the act of planting became a quiet ritual of forgiveness, a promise that I could nurture the part of me that still sought light. Days turned into weeks, and the small red rosebud began to unfurl its delicate petals. I visited the garden often, tending not only to the fragile plant, but also to the renewed spirit within me. I learned to let go, bit by bit, forgiving myself for the years of silence and anger that had kept me from accepting help. Amelia remained by my side, a steadfast reminder that compassion need not be reserved for others alone. Even as the shadows of my past lingered, the rose grew, a living symbol of rebirth and the power of care. I discovered that true healing was not a destination but an ongoing journey, a process of continual renewal, where each new bloom, each small act of kindness, added a layer of resilience to my battered heart. One crisp autumn afternoon, while we sat amidst the golden leaves that carpeted the park, I reflected on the transformative power of being seen and understood. I recalled the countless nights of solitude and the relentless pursuit of justice that had drained me of hope. Yet now, in the gentle presence of another, I began to sense that even the deepest wounds could mend. I whispered to Amelia, "I was so afraid to feel again, to let someone in. But you showed me that there is grace in vulnerability." Her smile was soft, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and in that silent exchange, I felt a weight lift from my soul. As winter approached, the garden lay dormant under a blanket of snow, yet beneath that stillness, life persisted. I carried the memory of the red rose with me, a quiet emblem of renewal that thrived even in the coldest of seasons. I came to understand that healing is not measured by the absence of pain, but by the courage to cultivate hope in its midst. Amelia's unwavering belief in me rekindled a spark that had lain dormant for too long, reminding me that even after the harshest winters, spring inevitably follows. Now, as I walk through the park each morning, I see the blooms and the bare branches alike as part of a grand, cyclical narrative, a story of loss and recovery, of sorrow and beauty intermingled. I no longer isolate myself in the shadows of my past. Instead, I embrace the light that has found its way back into my life. I have learned that forgiveness is not an act of forgetting, but a powerful declaration that the future can be shaped by the gentle hands of compassion. And in that healing, I have discovered the true meaning of resilience. The ability to transform pain into a symphony of quiet strength, a silent promise that even the deepest wounds can bloom anew. Every time I see that red rose now, I am reminded of the day I chose to let someone in, and in doing so, allowed myself to be healed. Life didn't return with fireworks. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic revelations. Instead, it arrived slowly, like dawn seeping through the cracks of an old window, warming the floorboard inch by inch. I began each morning the same way, boiling water for coffee, cracking open the window to listen to the wind moving through the pines, and sitting with the quiet. For once, The quiet no longer haunted me. It embraced me. The cabin in Vermont had no address that mattered. No plaque. No reminders of what I had done. It was just a place where the days stretched long, where birds came and went without asking questions, and where my breath finally found rhythm again. I hung a wind chime from the porch, a gift from Amelia, and it sang only when the wind chose to move it, a reminder that peace can't be forced. It has to arrive on its own terms. The old part of me, the viper, remained, but she didn't dominate. She sat quietly within, watchful but not restless. I let her rest. I read again. Not mission reports, not intelligence briefs, but novels and poetry. Stories about ordinary people doing small, meaningful things. And in them, I found myself again, not the woman who exposed a shadow empire, but the girl who once pressed her cheek against soil and listened for roots growing underground. But I knew this life wasn't mine alone to keep. Healing had given me the gift of space. And space asked to be shared. So I started small. I built a bench beside the trail that wound past the edge of the property, carved a message into the backrest. If you're tired, sit. If you're grieving, breathe. If you're lost, stay until the light finds you. It was simple, anonymous, and over time, I found little notes tucked beneath the seat. Thank you scribbles, sketches, dried flowers tied with string. I never replied. I only added a fresh cushion when rain washed the old one out. Then one day, I returned to find someone waiting there. A young woman, early 20s, frayed backpack, eyes heavy. When she saw me, she didn't speak, just moved over so I could sit too. We shared the silence for nearly an hour. When she finally spoke, it was just 3 words. You wrote that? I nodded. She smiled. Thank you. I didn't know I needed that. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words stayed with me, echoing louder than any broadcast, louder than all the headlines I'd ever made. There were people still searching, still hurting, and if my bench, my quiet invitation, could help even one of them feel less alone, maybe that was reason enough to speak again. So I did. I opened a small community circle, not a support group, not therapy, just a quiet gathering for those with stories they didn't know how to carry. We met weekly in the library basement. A teacher whose husband never returned from deployment, a teen who'd run from a foster home, an old man who whispered to his cane as if it held memories. We didn't talk much about trauma. We talked about tomatoes, stars, childhood songs. And slowly, healing became something bigger than my own. I watched people grow lighter, not unburdened, but stronger under the weight. They began showing up not just for themselves, but for one another. A kind of family formed, imperfect, patched together, but real. No one asked what I had done. They just passed the coffee and offered second chances. I remained anonymous to most, though some guessed. A few asked if I was that woman. I smiled and said, not anymore. Amelia visited often. She brought seeds, stories, and warmth. One spring, she handed me a journal filled with letters from the community. Gratitude in graphite, hope in ink. I read each one beneath the oak in the park where we first met. One note read, "Because of you, I told my story out loud. For the first time." Another, "You reminded me I wasn't the only one." And that's when it became clear, my story didn't end with exposure or vengeance. It continued in every voice that found its courage, in every hand that reached across the dark. I never returned to Washington. I never sat before a camera again, but I wrote letters. I mentored quietly. I sponsored scholarships for veterans and whistleblowers. I sent anonymous donations to journalists like Julian, who now ran an independent newsroom dedicated to truth-telling. Somewhere along the way, my garden bloomed again. The roses came back, stronger, wilder, more vibrant than ever. Not manicured, not arranged, just alive. And I understood then, healing isn't about restoration. It's about transformation. The storm had not spared me, but I had rooted deeper because of it. Now, each time I walk among the flowers, I carry the voices of those who followed the light I once risked everything to ignite. And in their steps, I see the future, a generation unwilling to forget, unafraid to speak, and unshaken by silence. I hadn't planned to return. Some places deserve to be left behind, like bones buried under soft earth, undisturbed. But one morning, the wind changed. A current in the stillness. A pull I couldn't ignore. I packed lightly and boarded a train heading east, back to the place where I'd once been erased. Havenwood looked smaller. Buildings shrunk, paint chipped, sidewalks cracked with years. but the shadows were the same. I walked past the police station where Corbin once stared me down, past the grocery store where people used to whisper, and toward the street I hadn't seen in decades, Chestnut Lane. My old house was still there. Different colors now. A swing on the porch. A child's bike tipped in the yard. I stood at the gate for a long while, remembering the roses I used to tend beside that very fence. They were gone. In their place, tulips. Bright, open-faced. And temporary. I smiled. Something about that felt right. I didn't go in. It wasn't mine anymore. But I didn't need to enter to reclaim what I had left. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of old air fill my lungs. No more fear. No more shame. Just memory acknowledged. From there, I visited the school I once walked past daily without being noticed. I stood in the hallway where, at 16, I first heard the words that fractured my youth. She doesn't belong. Now, there was a mural. Students' names painted in bright letters. Below them, every story matters. I traced my fingers over the wall. Quiet. Whole. That afternoon, I walked to the retirement center where Corbin now lived. Word had it he left law enforcement quietly. Without trial, without apology. The desk clerk recognized my name. "You're Eleanor?" she asked. I nodded. He won't say much these days, but he still talks about you, like a warning or a ghost. I asked for a few minutes. He sat in a wheelchair by the window, frail, eyes fogged with age. He didn't turn when I entered. "You win," he said, before I could speak. "I didn't come to win." I replied. Silence hung between us. Not tense, just full. "I hated you," he said. "I needed someone to blame. You were the story that ruined mine." "I know," I said. "You ruined my father." "He ruined himself," I said gently. "But you were a boy. You needed a villain." He chuckled, dry and bitter. "Still good at that, aren't you?" "Not anymore." We sat for a while, watching the light shift across the window pane. I didn't press. I didn't scold. I didn't forgive. I just sat. Before I left, I placed a single red rose, cut fresh from my Vermont garden, on the table beside him. He didn't touch it, but he didn't look away. Outside, the sky was beginning to turn. Evening brushed gold onto brick. I walked to the cemetery next. No one had asked me to, but I needed to. I found Eli Becker's name etched into a flat stone. Clean. Simple. A flag fluttered beside it. Faded. I knelt and laid my hand on the granite. I kept the promise, I whispered. We weren't forgotten. Around me, the wind stirred the grass. A few rows over, I heard the gentle murmur of someone else speaking to their own ghost. We all carry names that shaped us. Some we carry in our hearts. Others we carry in silence. The next morning, I visited the coffee shop where I once watched the world through lowered lashes. The barista was new. She asked my name. "Ellie," I said. She wrote it carefully on the cup. Smiled. Pretty name. It felt strange, that smile. Not performative. Not heavy with history. Just real. I sat by the window, sipping slowly, watching young people laugh about things that didn't matter. Music, weather. A broken phone case. Their lives not built around secrets or silence. I finished my drink and left a note under the napkin. Tell your truth, even if your voice shakes. No signature. No name. Just the echo of a voice once hidden. My last stop was the library. The same table where I used to research government files now held a group of kids in debate. I listened for a moment. One said, "You know that story? About the woman who exposed the shadow agency?" Another nodded. "Viper 7. She was a beast." I smiled, turned, walked out. Let them mythologize me. Let them reshape the story. I didn't need credit. I didn't need to own the ending. I just needed to see the world moving forward without forgetting. At the train station, as I boarded the car that would carry me back to quiet, I looked over my shoulder once. Havenwood stood in the dusk, older, perhaps, but breathing. And I knew. I had changed. And maybe, just maybe, it had too. I never planned to speak again, not in public. Not for an audience. But stories, I've learned, don't belong to the teller forever. They're seeds. Once released, they root where they're needed. And sometimes, the world asks for more. The first request came in a handwritten letter, postmarked from Ohio. A high school teacher wrote, "We study whistleblowers and forgotten figures." My students asked, "Why don't we learn about women like you?" I sat with that sentence for days. Then, one rainy afternoon, I recorded a short video. My hands trembled as I clicked record. I wore no makeup. Within a week, it had 3 million views. Comments flooded in stories, confessions, questions. Some were angry, some grateful. Most just wanted someone to say, "You're not alone." A month later, I just held her tighter. From there, it grew. Schools, veteran centers, bookstores, churches, digital spaces. People gathered, not to hear war stories, but to learn how to carry their own. I met a boy who used to believe men couldn't cry until he saw me tremble on screen and decided strength looked like that. 2. A nonprofit formed around those moments. Not in my name, but because of them. It offered legal support, trauma counseling, storytelling workshops. Chloe helped build the infrastructure. Maya and her friends ran the media side. Ghost stayed behind the curtain, ensuring every channel remained protected. I watched them build something I never could have dreamed in my years of service. A community not bound by secrets, but by shared courage. And still, I never played hero. At every event, I reminded people I wasn't the only one. I was just the one who couldn't stay quiet anymore. Some in power tried to paint me as dangerous again. A threat to national security, they called it. Others tried to canonize me, the grandmother of truth. I denied both titles. I was just a woman with a past. And now, a woman with a voice. When a documentary team approached, I refused narration. Let others speak, I said. Let the ones who came after tell the rest. They did. And it was better that way. Everywhere I went, I urged people not just to listen, but to speak. I looked into cameras and asked, "What story have you been too afraid to tell?" A teenage girl made a podcast called Viper's Daughters and interviewed activists worldwide. Sometimes I cried reading the comments. Sometimes I had to turn everything off and walk into the trees. A boy no older than 17 sent me a voice message. They told me I was weak for speaking up. Then I watched your video. I guess if you can, I can too. I saved that message. Played it on quiet mornings. We never know whose life we hold gently in our hands when we tell the truth. But we hold it just the same. And that, I've come to believe, is sacred. I often ask myself now, would I do it all again? Even knowing the cost, the betrayals, the loneliness, the scars etched deeper than flesh. I find my answer comes without hesitation. Yes, because the road I took wasn't about vengeance. It was about pulling back the curtain, even if what stood behind it could burn. I didn't walk through fire to become a symbol. I walked through because no one else would, and silence was no longer an option. There were nights I doubted, days I wanted to disappear again. But every time I stood in a room full of trembling voices finding courage, I knew I had chosen well. Not easily, not painlessly, but well. I've come to understand that regret is a shadow that always follows, but it doesn't have to lead. It lingers, yes, whispering what could have been. But my steps are forward now. I walk with steadier feet, even on uncertain ground. When I think of the worst days, the night Phoenix fell, the betrayal by Corbin, the smear campaigns and broken friendships, I feel a tightness in my chest. But it's not bitterness anymore. It's reverence. Because those moments formed me. They chiseled away the illusions and left behind a version of myself I could live with. I'm not the strongest. I'm not the bravest. But I'm still standing. And that matters. Sometimes, healing doesn't mean feeling whole. Sometimes, it means accepting that wholeness isn't the goal, truth is. And truth, as it turns out, can live inside broken things. They didn't just help me finish the mission, they helped me find myself in its aftermath. When the headlines faded and the noise died down, I was left with the echo of something rare. Peace. It doesn't arrive in parades. It arrives in the small choices. The slow mornings. The way sunlight catches on a kitchen table. The smell of bread rising. The first bloom after winter. There's a quote I once read in a tattered poetry book. And still, I rise, not to fly, but to walk again. I carry that now, because I no longer need to run. I no longer chase justice with clenched fists. I open my hands and let the next generation carry it forward. If I had to do it again, I would. Not because I loved the fight, but because I loved what came after. And because somewhere, someone still sits in silence, wondering if they're allowed to speak. To them, I say yes. You are. Dear me. The one crouched on the bathroom floor, hands trembling, staring into nothing. I remember you. You thought you were finished. Thought silence was your only shelter. That your voice would shatter if you tried to use it. You didn't believe anyone would care what you had to say. You believed, with terrible certainty, that disappearing would hurt less than being seen. But I'm here now. I've walked every step from that floor to this moment, and I want you to know, you were wrong, but not in the way you feared. You weren't too much. You weren't broken beyond repair. You weren't a ghost in your own story. You were a seed waiting for the right season. I know the nights felt endless. I know you questioned every choice. You told yourself it was weakness to cry, weakness to hesitate, weakness to want comfort. But all those tears, they weren't failures. But I tell you this, you are not alone. And you never were. There were people who believed in you before you even believed in yourself. Some you hadn't met yet. Some you'd already passed by. Too afraid to ask for help. They were waiting, all of them, for you to speak. You'll speak. You'll speak so loud the world will tremble. And you'll be afraid. Every time. But you'll do it anyway. And one day, you'll realize that courage doesn't feel like thunder. It feels like trembling fingers still writing the truth. I remember how you used to flinch at your reflection. You saw a stranger. Someone worn. Someone used up. But now, I look into that same mirror and I see someone forged. Someone tempered by fire but still tender. You were never meant to be steel. You were meant to be soil. My dear shadow self, I thank you. For not giving up. For not turning bitter. For choosing to rise, not in defiance, but in grace. We made it. Not unscarred, but whole. And now, when I see someone else sitting in silence, I sit beside them. And I wait. Because I remember how long it took for someone to sit beside me. Love. Ellie. Dear Corbin. I've written this letter 100 times. Burned it. Buried it. Rewritten it again. Not because I needed you to read it, but because I needed to say it once clearly. And without flinching. I hated you. Not just for the arrest. Not just for the lies. But for the years of silence you wrapped around me like chains. You made me question my memories. You weaponized my past. You dragged ghosts from corners I'd long made peace with and forced me to relive them under fluorescent lights and handcuffs. You didn't just try to destroy me. You tried to erase me. Make me a villain in the town where I had once been nothing more than a gardener and a name no one remembered. You let your grief become a blade and pointed it at my throat, thinking if you spilled enough of my story, you'd drown your own pain. You failed. I lost the safety I had slowly built in the cracks of a life already broken by war. You didn't destroy me, but you did damage things that mattered. And yet, here's the part one never expected to write. I don't hate you anymore. Not because you changed. Not because you apologized. But because hate is a weight I no longer wish to carry. I look at you now, older, diminished, quiet, and I see what time does to all of us. It softens the sharp edges. And maybe, if we let it, it makes space for understanding. You inherited a wound you didn't create. Your father was dishonored in silence, and no one told you the truth. That truth festered. It made you bitter, made you dangerous, and I became the symbol you used to soothe your shame. I don't excuse you, but I understand you. You wanted someone to pay. I became the receipt for a debt left by someone else. That realization doesn't make what you did right, but it explains the path you took. And knowing that lets me step off the battlefield we built together. I forgive you. Not because you asked. It's cutting the tether between pain and identity. And I'm tired of being tethered to a story that began with your rage. When I placed that rose beside you, I wasn't offering a truce. You don't get to live in my chest anymore. You don't get to haunt my sleep or dull my voice. This is where I leave you. I walk forward now, not into triumph, not into fame, but into peace. And in that peace, there is no room for you. Ellie, I didn't speak that day. I didn't write, or walk, or reach for a phone. I simply sat by the window as snow fell, slow, soft, indifferent. The world had gone still, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fill it with motion. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the branches carried winter like a familiar weight. The trees didn't complain. They just held it. So I did too. That hour passed like water. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I let myself exist in silence, the kind not born of fear, but of fullness. A silence that wrapped around me like a blanket rather than a blindfold. I watched the breath on the glass fade and return. Fade, return. I was alive. That was enough. Later, I recorded a message, not for broadcast, not for the public, but for the ones who had been walking in the dark like I once did. My voice low, steady. If you're still hiding, I said, still aching, still wondering if the world can hold your truth, know this, I am here. I have been where you are, and I will stay here, on this edge of light, until you are ready to step forward. I didn't try to offer certainty, just presence. Sometimes that's all we need. Someone waiting in the quiet. Someone holding space without expectation. I let the message in with silence. No music. They said, I didn't know healing could look like stillness. They said, I thought I was alone. And so, I invited them in. I asked them to speak, not for me, but for themselves. Tell your story. I wrote, even if your voice trembles, even if your words come slowly, even if all you can say is, I made it through. That is enough. They responded. A veteran in Montana shared his first memory of war. A nurse in New Jersey described holding a patient's hand through a final breath. A teenager in Tulsa posted a video titled, I'm Still Here. I listened to them all, not because I needed more stories, but because I finally understood the truth I had chased across rooftops, courts, and memory. Healing is a circle, not a finish line. And now, I was part of the circle that held others when they stepped forward. At a workshop in Portland, a woman stood up and said, I didn't think my story mattered. I looked at her and said, it does now, because you said it out loud. And around her, others nodded. This is what legacy means to me. Not medals or names carved in stone, but ripples. Quiet truths spoken into rooms that once held only silence. Sometimes I walk in the woods with a small notebook. I write no names, just words. Stillness is not weakness. Softness is not surrender. You survived, and that is sacred. At the end of every gathering, I look out at the room, trembling, teary, trying. And I say this. If this story touched something in you, let that part speak. Write it. Sing it. Tell it to the wind if that's all you can do. But don't keep it locked away. Someone else is waiting to hear they're not alone. And I pause, so the silence can answer back. Every second you spent hearing my voice was a kind of trust. And trust, I've learned, is the most fragile and sacred thing we ever give one another. So truly, thank you. There were days I thought no one would ever hear this story, that it would die with me, like so many others, buried beneath layers of clearance stamps and classified ink. But you showed me I was wrong. You listened. You saw me. And in doing so, you helped me see myself again, not just as a shadow or a survivor, but as a whole person. The world didn't change overnight. Truth found new language. That ripple, small as it is enough for me. Where do I go from here? I don't know exactly. And for the first time, that uncertainty doesn't scare me. I have a garden that needs tending, a bench that needs sanding, and letters I still write. Some I send. Most I don't. I have sunrises to greet, tea to brew, and names I whisper to the wind just to say, you are remembered. I'm not done, not really. Just quieter now. But before I go, I want to ask you something. If you've ever stood at the edge of your voice, unsure if it deserves space, step forward. If you've ever held a story too heavy for your own hands, share it. If you've ever believed that silence is safer than truth, know this. Your voice might just be the lantern someone else is waiting for in the dark. So light it. Stand up. Tell us who you are. And if you've already done that, help someone else do the same. Because the stories we carry aren't meant to be hidden. They're meant to be passed like fire in cold hands. Not to burn, but to warm. This story is mine. Now, it's yours too. So go. Write your chapter. Speak your name. And never, ever believe that it doesn't matter. Because it does. It always did.